Alright, strictly singles is right here. Not much to look at. We'll take a look at this. You wouldn't even know this place was here. Here's some gaming tables.
Those are 19.
19?
Yeah, there's two packs in
I'm guessing the other stuff is packs like this and more expensive, are they?
Pretty cool stuff. So now that I'm back home from Halifax, I can go through these. There are 36 cards in all. 35 of them come from the 1971 O-Pee-Chee set. This is when Montreal Canadiens surprisingly won a Stanley Cup by beating the Chicago Blackhawks in 7 games with a rookie goaltender named Ken Dryden. So I'm not going to go into a lot of backstories because there's so many cards here. But let's begin. First up, we got defenseman for the Boston Bruins, Don Ari. He won 2 Stanley Cups with the Bruins. These cards are great. This is a great series. This one's got a little bit of a creasing in it. And these are called the Portrait Series because it looks like it's in a portrait. Then we got defenseman for the LA Kings, Paul Curtis. This is his rookie card. Don't know much about this guy. He only has one other card. And it's not in bad shape, actually. Now, the back of these cards would always give you a little comic talking about the player itself. So Paul's teammates call him the Hound Dog. And it had a light green back. Buffalo Sabres defenseman Mike Robitaille. It's a rookie card, but he is also in a New York Rangers uniform. So he was traded to Buffalo, where he'd only played who knows how many games, because he was traded from New York to Detroit the year before and played 34 games. So they must not have gotten him in a Detroit uniform. I know he did play for the Sabres for quite a few years, and I think it was with their Stanley Cup finalist team in '75. Next up, Chicago Blackhawks defenseman Bill White. Bill White was traded from LA to Chicago, and he was an all-star defenseman with the Blackhawks, played in the '72 Summit Series. Had a good career with them. Went to 2 Stanley Cup finals, but lost both times to Montreal. Next up we have Vancouver Canucks center Andre Boudreau. He actually started his career in Montreal, went to Minnesota, Chicago, St. Louis, then played 6 seasons with the Canucks, was one of their top scorers, and then jumped to the WHA where he played for the Quebec Nordiques and won the Avco Trophy there. California Golden Seals left winger Gary Croteau. He was one of the college-trained hockey players, which was a rare thing at the time, but was becoming more and more common, especially as the 80s approached. Then we have goalie for the Detroit Red Wings, Al Smith. He's in his Pittsburgh Penguin jersey, so he was traded from Pittsburgh to Detroit, but he started in Toronto, and I like the comic at the back of his card. He lost 22 pounds hoping to make the big time in Toronto. So they always had weight. He always had to make the weight as well. Al Smith, of course, played with a lot of teams. Played with the Buffalo Sabres. Played with the Winnipeg Jets, where he won an Avco trophy. Did he play for the Jets? He played for the Hartford Whalers. And he played for the Colorado Rockies. Montreal Canadiens left winger Mark Tardif. He had won 2 Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens. Was a really good player for them. But he jumped to the WHA. I think there was too much of a logjam at left wing, so he jumped to the W, played for the Quebec Nordiques, was one of their leading goal scorers, and won an Avco trophy there. California Golden Seals right winger Tom Williams. Looks like he has a Boston Bruins jersey. Yes, he played for the Boston Bruins and the Minnesota North Stars. He won a gold medal on the U.S. Olympic hockey team in 1960. I remember he later got traded. Later was part of the Washington Capitals. California Golden Seals defenseman Carol Vaudnay. He'd been part of the Montreal Canadiens, won a Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens. He would later get traded to Boston, where he won another Stanley Cup. And then he was traded with Phil Esposito to the New York Rangers for Jean Rattel and Brad Park. So he was part of a couple of big trades. Boston, I think, gave up Rick Smith and Reggie Leach for him. California gave up a lot of good players. They got some good players in return, but just never, for some reason, never made things work out. Next up, we have Boston Bruins goalie Jerry Cheevers. Cheevers won 2 Stanley Cups with Boston. This guy was notoriously hated training. He wouldn't train in the off season and would let himself go. So every year he used to have to stuff black plastic garbage bags around the windows of his car and that, and on the vents of his car, turn up the heat and drive around so he'd sweat it out. Now with Cheevers, he spent most of his career with Boston, but he did jump to the WHA. And I have his 1974 WHA card as well, when he played for the Cleveland Crusaders. He played there for like 3 years before jumping back to Boston. But it's interesting that he took the money, went to Cleveland. Boston's goaltending went south because they'd already traded Eddie Johnston away, and it just wasn't the same. So now I only need 2 more cards to complete that WHA set. Next up, we have another California Golden Seal, left winger Ernie Hick. Rookie card. He'd been part of the Montreal farm system, but then got traded to LA, or traded to California. LA Kings goalie Dennis DeJordy. He'd spent most of his career with Chicago up to that point. Believe he won a Stanley Cup with them. I'd have to go back and check that. I know I have all 3 LA Kings goalies for this season. So I have Gary Edwards and Rogie Vachon. So there was a real logjam in goal, and I think DeJordy was the one who got released. Minnesota North Stars center Jude Jerome. Really good player. This should be his rookie card, but it's not. It's got some marking in the back, so it's not as great a shape. He would later go on to play for the New York Islanders. Did go to the WHA and play for the Winnipeg Jets. Philadelphia Flyers goalie Doug Favell. This card's in better shape than most. Doug's sense of humor is well known in the league. Okay. Well, it'd have to be because he played for the Toronto Maple Leafs at one time and also played for the Colorado Rockies. And He was traded to Edmonton in 79-80, but only played in their farm system, then retired. Interesting though, he was the goalie that Colorado leaned on when they made the playoffs the one year, and he did really well. They lost the first game 2-1 in overtime to the Flyers, and they lost game 2 3-1. So he didn't do bad. The Rockies actually did really well considering how outclassed they were by the Flyers in talent. Yeah, Minnesota North Stars left winger Danny Grant. He'd be their second All-Star player behind Bill Goldsworthy. Danny Grant would score 50 goals in a season once. I don't think with Minnesota, I think it was with Detroit, where he was traded to. But he was a really good player for Minnesota. With Drouin, Grant, and Goldsworthy, Minnesota had one formidable line. And we got New York Rangers center Jean Rattel, member of the gag line. The gag line is the goal a game line. This is actually a really nice card for its time. All-star player with the Rangers. It's in the Summit Series. Later traded with Brad Park for Phil Esposito and Carol Vodney. Never won a Stanley Cup, but went to a lot of finals. They lost in 72. They lost to the Bruins in the final. Then, as a Bruin, he lost to Montreal twice in the finals. Then we got Montreal Canadiens left winger Frank Mahovlich. The Big M. He's in his Detroit jersey. Montreal picked him up from Detroit, where he played for Toronto. Detroit, Montreal. He won cups in Toronto, then won 2 cups in Montreal. He was offered $1 million by Chicago, but turned it down. Wanted to come and play with his brother Pete. Hall of Fame guy. I damaged this myself. When I brought these home, they were in a little plastic sleeve that had sticky tape, and they got caught. Just kind of sucks. But what can you do? Frank played a few years in Montreal, won the 71 and 73 Stanley Cup with them. Then he went to the WHA and played for the Birmingham Bulls, or Toronto Toros, depending, because it was both teams. Yeah, Boston Bruins right winger Ken Hodge. He won 2 Stanley Cups with Boston. And if you look closely, he's wearing jeans. No shoulder pads. And he's got his jeans on. Him and Phil Esposito famously wore jeans during this shoot. Phil Esposito didn't care much for hockey cards. I don't know about Ken Hodge. He was actually born in England. So he's the first NHL player born in England to win a Stanley Cup. Him and Esposito were line mates and had a lot of fun. He had 105 points that year and was a big part of Boston's success too. Both him and Esposito had been with Chicago Blackhawks before getting traded. That's one of those what-ifs in Chicago. Ken Hodge would later get traded to the New York Rangers. The Rangers thought that Esposito had his line mate back. He'd be more productive. So they traded Rick Middleton for Ken Hodge. And Ken Hodge had injury problems and was never the same player. Phil Esposito had a decent Rangers career, but it wasn't as great as the Boston one. We got defenseman for the Vancouver Canucks, Pat Quinn. Pat Quinn, I think, is more famous as a coach in the NHL and general manager with the Vancouver Canucks, Philadelphia Flyers, Toronto Maple Leafs. I think he was in Calgary for a bit. But he'd started his career with Toronto. Went to Vancouver. I know he played also for the Atlanta Flames. Was a captain. Tough guy. Next up, we have California Golden Seals center Walt McKechnie, who grew up in London, Ontario, not far from my hometown. This is the last California Golden Seal card that I needed. There's 19 California Golden Seals in this set. Most teams have 17, 18 cards. California got 19. I now have them all. Walt McKechnie played for a lot of different teams over his career. He'd actually come over from Minnesota in a trade. I knew he played for the Detroit Red Wings and the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Colorado Rockies. You have St. Louis Blues center Terry Crisp. It's a rookie card. He would go on to win us 1 or 2 Stanley Cups with the Philadelphia Flyers. He'd actually played Junior B in St. Mary's and was one of my mother's classmates. I don't think they ever spoke more than 50 words to each other. But they went to school together in St. Mary's, briefly. Terry Crisp was known more as a coach of the Calgary Flames, who took him to a Stanley Cup in '89. And he also coached, was it the Tampa Bay Lightning? To look that one up. I just know he was with Calgary. Like I said, he won a Stanley Cup with the Philadelphia Flyers. And then that's about it with his career, hockey-wise, playing-wise. Now, with this set, the first 132 cards are mixed like this, where players from each team, there's no consistency, but then the next, from 133 down to, say, 256, you get them in blocks of team cards. All right, next up we have Detroit Red Wings left winger Ab McDonald. He won 2 Stanley Cups with Montreal, and then 1 Stanley Cup with Chicago Blackhawks. Then went to the Boston Bruins, Detroit Red Wings, Pittsburgh Penguins, St. Louis Blues, back to Detroit, and then spent 2 years in the WHA with the Winnipeg Jets. So he was traded quite a bit. People think that players weren't traded that much back in before free agency, but they were. There was more player movement than you thought. Just that the contracts really sucked. Anyway, sticking with Detroit, we have defenseman Serge Junius. I can't even pronounce that last name. Someone help me out. Lejeunesse. It's a rookie card. Don't know much about the guy. I might have another of his cards. I might not. I'd have to check. Then we got LA Kings center Butch Goring. This is his rookie card. He played for the Kings throughout the 70s, and in 1980 he was traded to the New York Islanders, where he won 4 Stanley Cups. He was what the Islanders thought was the piece to the puzzle to win them the cup. In return, Billy Harris, who had been the first big name with the New York Islanders, and Dave Lewis, a defenseman, who later won cups with Detroit as a coach GM, were sent to LA. Which really sucks, because Billy Harris and Dave Lewis might have won a cup with the Islanders. But everyone thought Butch Goring was the missing piece of that puzzle. Excellent player. Why LA got rid of him, don't know, because they already had Marcel Dion and Charlie Simmer. Buffalo Sabres left winger Richard Martin, rookie card. And also he's one of the French connection. Him, Gilbert Perron, and René Robert formed probably the best line the Buffalo Sabres have ever had. He has no stats. So Guy Lafleur will be the same way. Same with Marcel Dion, they'll have no stats. But they'll get a card. Martin had a really good career with Buffalo, but injuries took their toll. And he spent one last season in LA in the 80s and then hung him up. There's a statue with the French connection outside Buffalo. Their hockey rink. Excellent player. Martin also went to a Stanley Cup final with Buffalo in '75. They lost to the Flyers. He holds the Buffalo Sabres franchise career record for hat tricks 4-goal games, 40-goal seasons, consecutive 40-goal seasons, 50-goal seasons. So he has 2 50-goal seasons, him and Danny Gare. They have 2 each. Now, Alexander Mogilny holds the record for most goals in a season, but he never did it twice. Martin is also 11th all-time in career goals per game average of .56 in NHL history. He's also an injury he suffered in 1978, where he had his legs kicked out from under him, and he hit his head hard on the ice. He was knocked unconscious and went into convulsions. After that play, helmets became more and more a common sight, especially with the Sabres. And after suffering another injury, he was traded in 81. Scotty Bowman traded him and Don Luce to LA Kings for a pair of draft picks, one which they used for the Tom Barrasso. Played 4 games for the Kings in 81, 3 in 82 before hanging up his skates in December of 81. His knees were completely ruined, unable to walk. He died at the age of 59, and analysis revealed that he had stage 2 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a disease normally associated with enforcers. The damage was believed to have stemmed from severe concussion he sustained in 78. So he definitely, the injuries he suffered took a toll on his health. Pittsburgh Penguins defenseman Tim Horton. Everyone knows this guy in Canada. Whether they know it or not, he actually he started the Tim Hortons franchise. You'd think everyone in India knows who he is, because so many Indians in this country work at Tim Hortons. Long-time NHL player, won some Stanley Cups with Toronto, got traded to New York Rangers, and then for this season, this card's a little dirty in the back, and for this season he was traded to Pittsburgh. And then in 1974, he was playing in Buffalo. He had a jaw and ankle injury when he was killed coming home. He was not wearing a seatbelt and was found 123 feet from the car, pronounced dead. However, he had twice the legal amount of alcohol in his system, probably to dull the pain of his injuries. Terrible end to his life. He was only 44 at the time. Still playing hockey at the age of 44. Tough guy. Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman Bob Bond. Another guy who won Stanley Cups in Toronto. Went to Oakland, then Detroit, back to Toronto. Very tough guy. Next up we have right winger, Toronto Maple Leafs, Brian Spencer. This is a rookie card, and he played 10 seasons for Buffalo, Toronto, New York Islanders, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. I know him best as a Leaf, and I believe I have his Pittsburgh Penguin card and Buffalo Sabre card as well. Now, he has a very tragic story. On December 12, 1970, Spencer was called up to play with the Leafs in what would be his first NHL game on television. He telephoned his father in British Columbia to tell him to watch the game that night on Hockey Night in Canada, as he was to be interviewed between periods. However, a game featuring Vancouver versus California Golden Seals was aired instead. Infuriated, Roy Spencer drove 135 kilometers to Prince George, where the closest TV station for CBC was located. When he arrived, he ordered station staff at gunpoint to broadcast the Leaf game, where no feed was available, to turn off the hockey entirely. Station complied, but as Spencer left the station, he was confronted by the RCMP, and after a brief standoff, Roy Spencer was shot and killed. So that must have been tough for Brian. First big-time national televised game he's going to be in. Told his dad, game wasn't in the area. Dad drove out with a gun to force the station to show the Leaf game, gets shot for his trouble and killed, and then Brian hears about it the next day. After his career was over, turned to alcohol and violence. 87, he was charged with kidnapping and murder and faced the death penalty. But the jury returned a not guilty verdict in 88 and vowed to change his life. Despite the acquittal and a move to Florida, his life spiraled out of control, and 3 months later, Spencer died under similar circumstances to his father. He was fatally shot in a robbery involving crack cocaine. In fact, a book on Brian's life, Gross Misconduct, The Life of Spinner Spencer, which was adapted in 1993 by Paul Gross, made for television movie, The Life of Brian Spencer. Paul Gross was that the hell was that TV show where he was a Mountie? And then he did Passchendaele, the movie. But yeah, a very tragic story for Brian Spencer. I think losing his father like he did sent him over the bend. Next up, we have goalie for the Philadelphia Flyers, Bruce Gamble. He is wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs jersey. It's been heavily airbrushed out. He'd spent time in New York, Boston, Toronto, where he got a Stanley Cup ring, I think. Then Philly. Other than that, I don't know much about him. Philadelphia Flyers, right winger, Gary Dornhofer. Dornhofer won 2 Stanley Cups with the Philadelphia Flyers. He actually started his career in Boston. Known for sitting and parking himself in front of the crease. Took a lot of injuries. I think Larry Robinson put him in the boards once and dented the boards. Yes, it was. So in a game in the Forum, Dornhofer was coming down, and Larry Robinson gave him such a hip check that it put a dent in the boards of the Forum. Dornhofer is best known in the 80s as a play-by-play announcer with Hockey Night in Canada. Minnesota North Stars goalie Gump Worsley, the last maskless goalie in the NHL, I believe. Played for the New York Rangers, Montreal Canadiens, and Minnesota North Stars. Won some Stanley Cups in Montreal. And just in a good goalie. By this time he had played 785 games, 41 shutouts, a 2.93 goals against average. Not bad for a guy who's 4 months younger than Jacques Plante by that time, but started the season like a 25-year-old rookie. Considering played for Minnesota, that's high praise. Vancouver Canucks defenseman Barry Wilkins, rookie card. He'd played 8 games with the Boston Bruins, and then went expansion draft to Vancouver. Played with Vancouver for a while, but then ended up in Philadelphia, and then I lost track of him. St. Louis Blues right winger, rookie card, Phil Roberto. He'd actually played for the Montreal Canadiens, got a Stanley Cup ring for this year, and he would return to Montreal and win another ring later on in the 70s. This guy has the best hockey card ever. If you see the next year, the 1972 O-Pee-Chee, he has got, sorry, not 72, if you see his 1973 hockey card, he's got the best one. He's still with St. Louis, and he's in a fight. He's in a fight. The referees are trying to pull him apart. And the guy he's fighting is goaltender Billy Smith from the New York Islanders. The best card ever. And last we have goaltender for the St. Louis Blues, Peter McDuff. I like that name, McDuff. Can't get enough of that wonderful McDuff. And he's also the guy who betrayed Macbeth. That's his rookie card. Played with the Blues for 1 year, played 10 games. In fact, he's not even mentioned his stats, so this would be his first year. 71-72. He only played 10 games that year, went to the Rangers, played 1 game. In 73-74, played 6 games. And then he was sent the expansion draft to the Kansas City Scouts. That card I have. Played 36 games with them, and then went to the Detroit Red Wings for 4 games. Then finally, in his career with the WHA, with the Racers, played 57 games total in the NHL. He plays 57 games in the NHL and manages to get 3 NHL cards. Unreal. Must be nice. But there we have it. We have 35 cards from the 1971 O-Pee-Chee set. I only paid $75 for them. And then I paid $14 for the WHA Achievers card. So not bad. Not a bad haul. Usually these cards cost between, depending on the quality, $2 to $4 for common cards. Though I did go one place where it was $1. That's because it had a tape mark on the back. But I'm getting closer to completing this set. I have some big names to get though, unfortunately. I think I need 80 cards, and I got the complete set. So it's one of 2 sets that I'm really working on to complete. And then the other sets I'm just fiddling around with right now. Hey, hockey cards fans out, any hockey fans out there, let me know what you guys think. Anyone who knew about the Brian Spencer story? I think that's a big thing, and I think it's a tragedy. Leave comments in the comment section. Until next time, this has been Hockey Night in Belmont.